Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Chasing Chevy Chase cast. I am your host, Chris Dash from the Culture Cast, and I am joined by my two good friends all the way from the projection booth, Mike White.
Just a little touch-up.
God. And all the way from Wake Up Heavy, a horror movie podcast, and boy, this movie is a horror, Mark Begley.
This place is hotter than Dolly Parton's mini pad.
Wow. Oh, boy.
I'm so glad you guys put in a lot more effort into what you just said than Chevy Chase did into his acting or voiceover, because yes, on this show, we talk about movies that star Chevy Chase, his vehicle films from a certain time in a certain place, essentially from Foul Play to National Lampoon's Vegas Vacation. This is smack dab in the middle of that. This is 1983's William Friedkin directed. I think he's as confused as we are. William Friedkin directed based on a screenplay by Paul Brickman. Yes, Paul Brickman, the gentleman who wrote the screenplay for Risky Business and directed Risky Business. We're talking about 1983's Chevy Chase, Gregory Hines, and Sigourney Weaver comedy? Deal of the Century. So Deal of the Century is what Lord of War would be if Lord of War was bad. That's maybe being a little hyperbolic, but Chevy Chase plays a arms dealer who happens upon a deal that allows him to get the contract for a big sale of drones to a Central American country. Look, it's not that I'm struggling with the plot. Yeah, it's not that I'm struggling with the plot, but the plot of this movie doesn't matter at all. But all you need to know is Chevy Chase plays an arms dealer who happens upon a arms deal that is not his. It is a man whose wife is played by Sigourney Weaver, who shows up throughout the movie, and then Gregory Hines plays a character who's no longer wanting to be an arms dealer and wants to be pastor.
Christian.
Yeah, born again Christian. Boy, if this doesn't sound like hijinks galore, I don't know what does. Mike, I'm gonna kick it to you first. What did you think?
I don't know if I had ever seen this movie before. I think we talked maybe on the Foul Play episode way back when that I used to get this and Best Defense mixed up because of the white guy, black guy on the cover, and also talking about defense and weapons and those kind of things. I have to imagine that Best Defense is Citizen Kane compared to this.
This is the Kane from Citizen Kane at this point.
Oh, this was just wretched. And we talked a little bit before we started recording. I read the script for this, the Paul Brickman script, which some people give credit to Bernard Edelman for this. And I can only imagine that it's the Bernard Edelman that wrote Dear America, Letters Home from Vietnam, because this would have been kind of along the lines of that time period. That was 87. This comes out in 83. And well, it was odd because there were a lot of movies that this reminded me of that were right around the same time. But with Edelman, I looked up his bibliography, could not find any books or articles or anything where he wrote about defense contractors. And defense contractors are ripe for being made fun of. And just there is a lot of potential humor that could be in this movie, but it is handled so poorly and so wrong. And that goes all the way back to this Brickman script. And we'll get into some of the ins and outs of this stuff. But my God, the script is a freaking mess. And what you read in that script is almost verbatim on screen. So shame on you, Billy Friedkin, for not going in and doing a rewrite of this because it was a fucking mess. So anyway, I hated this movie. Absolutely hated it.
What about you, Begley? I don't think anyone would confuse this movie for a movie that's good at this point.
First time watch for sure for me. And like you, Mike, I would confuse it with Best Defense just based on the poster image. And I always ask my family, do you want to watch this one? And I said, it's got 10% on Rotten Tomatoes, blah, blah, blah. Then I mentioned the cast and they're like, oh, okay, we'll watch it, based mainly on Sigourney Weaver. So that was their first mistake. And so we plugged it in, turned it on, watched it. And my wife at one point was like, well, it's not that bad. And I'm like, okay.
Oh, wow.
All right.
It's part of the It's Not That Bad club.
And I didn't want to vehemently disagree with her, but at that point I was like, man, something is off with this. And it was I kept thinking of Dr. Strangelove and how that absurdity in that movie works so perfectly. And I'm like, this is what this needs. They're not going there. It's not absurd. They're playing it too straight, but yet they want it to be funny. But everybody's kind of playing it straight, other than the few. And we need to have, can I add something to the program here? We need to start counting, and I should have done this a long time ago. I didn't realize it was a thing. How many times Chevy Chase says Gesundheit in a movie? Punchline, joke. This has got to be the fourth or fifth time he's done that in a film. So anyway, yeah, it's a mess. It's a tonal mess. It's the editing is bizarre. I'm sorry, Billy, but the direction was just boring. Lots of static kind of wide shots of people talking to each other about uninteresting things. And, I don't know, Wallace Shawn is wasted in the film.
Literally. Yeah. Then there's
and wasted.
Wallace Shawn is a treasure that should be, coveted by everyone. And then here totally wasted. What are you doing here?
And it's not very clear that that's Sigourney Weaver's husband or Chevy doesn't understand it, but it's pretty obvious based on his narration that she's married to a guy that's half her size and twice her age. And Wallace Shawn fits the bill perfectly, but he doesn't make that connection until much later. Anyway, sorry, I'm rambling on here. Chris, what did you think of?
Oh yes, please continue to ramble. I'm not going to stop you. This is one of the most criminally unfunny things I've ever seen. To be not, I wouldn't say forced, because we did this willingly. It's like anyone was forcing bamboo stakes under my fingers at the same time. But this is the cinematic equivalent of waterboarding. I mean, this movie is, I don't know what's worse, the fact that it's directed by William Friedkin, or it's the fact that William Friedkin left his name on. Like, if I had been the director of this, I would have done everything in my power to be like, take my name off. Alan Smithy. I don't care who directed it. Just don't let them put my name on it. Yeah. Look, for as much as I love Friedkin, for as much as we can joke about him telling Nicholas Winding Refn, I gotta go fuck a rolling donut off of a hill. Yo, dude, you made this movie. Like, this is
why he never talks about it.
Just because he doesn't. You know what they say, though? A, can't talk about it anymore because he's dead. But B, also, it's kind of hard to talk about a movie that you just don't make. So just don't make it. And it's shocking because, to your point, Mike, I was expecting to read the script and somehow it be different. Nope, because then it's like, okay, it's somewhat defensible because you're like, well, he started off on good footing and it just got lost in translation. No, there was no translation for it to get lost in. This is I don't know. William Friedkin is someone who directed like one of my favorite movies, The Exorcist. I mean, it's like, it is a classic piece of filmmaking. It is a piece of filmmaking that has been aped so many times at this point, and yet nobody can really do it as well as he did. And yet he also directed what is one of the worst movies I've ever watched for anything I've done. And guys, I hate to say this, but this is like the second time this has happened on this show. What's so sad. And Mike, we were talking about this when we did Francis Weber movies. When comedies are bad, it's like,
it's a pain.
It's the fucking worst. Like, a bad horror movie can be somewhat salvageable. Like, it's fun for how ridiculous it is, or at least some interesting kills.
Right.
In a fucking comedy, if there's no laughs, what are we here for? Like, right. That's what you're there for. And if there are none, boy, somebody's gonna be leaving the theater disappointed. And I can imagine going to see this movie in theaters and just wanting to riot when I left. Be like, they took my money. This, it feels like robbing people. This movie is, to say it's an affront is being nice. Like, there are scenes that just end. Chevy Chase is, I don't use Letterboxd, but when I do, I just like write one word, one sentence, but it's not anything mean. It's just the feelings. Like, I almost wanted to put in my review, I alluded to it, like, this reminded me of Chevy Chase in Oh Heavenly Dog. It's just, thank God the narration wasn't throughout them. Because when he narrates in this movie, it's just the same. It's the same, just like, here I am being forced to be an actor again and do ADR. Like, wow. Life must be hard for you, Chevy Chase. People backing up a fucking Brinks truck to your house with money to do piss-ass movies like this, and you can't even be bothered to really show up. Meh, I guess that speaks to what everybody else thought about this movie, even the people making it. Like, the poster alone with Gregory Hines and Chevy Chase thumbs up and Sigourney Weaver should have all been thumbs down, all three of them. And I would have understood exactly what their feelings are in this movie, because watching it's made very clear everybody's either phoning it in or couldn't be bothered to give a shit.
Well, even just the pacing of this movie, and again, goes back to the screenplay where, you're watching it, I don't remember how far into this movie before Chevy Chase even shows up. And then you're so far into this movie before Sigourney Weaver shows up. Well, I guess they show up right around the same time.
Yeah.
And then when they finally connect later on, but then Gregory Hines as well, he takes forever to show up. And then I just have to bring it up right now because I don't want to wait. Richard Libertini.
God.
I love Richard Libertini. You guys wow. I love him so much. And his character is introduced at exactly the wrong time in this movie, because when you introduce him so late in this film, you think that he's going to be a major part of the finale of the film. He has absolutely nothing to do with this movie. He shows up for one scene and that's it. And the way that they build to that scene and the way that you think like, oh, well, this is going to play into it. No, you could cut that entire thing out and it would not make a difference to this. But by putting it into that third act, exactly where they put it is exactly the wrong place to put that scene. Could have been earlier, could have been out of the movie, maybe even as a final like teaser at the end. I don't care, but it was just absolutely the wrong thing to do. And this movie does the wrong thing so many times. There are so many questions. Like, I understand comedy, and I understand there are times where you do outrageous things in order to get a laugh. But then there are times where, in this world that you have built for us, when Chevy Chase is showing off the weapons to these guys near the beginning of the movie, okay, that's great. But when he actually uses and I know it's not a bazooka, but a bazooka-like weapon to shoot a Jeep that is obviously a military Jeep down on the street and blow these guys back, through a couple doors, it's a funny visual, but it makes absolutely no sense for him to be doing that as part of this arms deal. And that's what this movie excels in, is moments that just don't make any fucking sense. I mean, I alluded to a little touch up for your flame job. We'll talk about that later, but I could not wait to talk about Libertini and just how incredibly awful that placement of that scene was.
I was when you waste Richard Libertini in your movie, like, fuck you is really, like, I don't want to, like Mark, you alluded to in the opening here, like, we may have been dismissive of movies that Chevy Chase was in the past. Maybe not dismissive, but maybe a little hard on him. This movie deserves it. Like, I went and looked because, again, curiosity killing the cat and all that. So I went and looked at what else was out the weekend of November 4th of 1983. So the film that walked away with the box office was Deal of the Century. It made $3.5 million at the box office that week. Wow. About $3,000 per theaters on average. The next film was Never Say Never Again.
Oh, God.
Followed closely by, shockingly, Richard Pryor, Here and Now, The Big Chill and All the Right Moves, and then The Dead Zone and The Right Stuff. Followed closely by The Osterman Weekend, Educating Rita, and then, ironically, at number 10 is Mr. Mom, but at 11, all better movies.
Oh, man.
That's what's at 11.
Very ironic. Well, Mr. Mom.
That's really ironic. At 11, making $800,000, Risky Business. Yeah.
Those weren't all opening weekends, though, right?
No. But Deal of the Centuries was opening weekend.
Right.
Yeah, that was back when movies would stick around for a long time. I know you know that, Mark, and I know you know that, Chris, but for our listeners back then, yeah, you could be open for weeks and weeks and weeks, not one of these like in and out of the box office within, a month. It was more like months that you could have this. So yeah, having two Paul Brickman movies out at the same time kind of makes sense. And some of those are great movies. I love Educating Rita. There's some really good titles in there. So, oh man,
I love Mr. Mom.
Yeah. Oh, Mr. Mom is fucking fantastic. And yeah, I love the connection there, because as soon as the one actor shows up, Graham Jarvis, I was just like, where do I know that guy from? Oh, I remember him talking about fish on a commercial. And then I'm like, okay, there we go. Mr. Mom. I got it.
Well, it was a little interesting that he's also in Parents, and they play that fucking music from Parents in there to my daughter, and I'm like, hey, did she watch that with me back when we did that episode, Chris?
Which feels like a lifetime ago now, but that was like six months ago. To answer your question, Deal of the Century, that was its opening weekend. Richard Pryor's Here and Now had been out for 2 weekends, and the movie that was the close second, Never Say Never Again, had been out for over a month. So
there's no way it beat a James Bond movie.
Yeah, but that James Bond, that's a James Bond movie that was, speaking of films that don't deserve people being diplomatic about it, that may be one of them. Never Say Never Again, for those of you that don't know, that's the Sean Connery Came Back for Money movie. And it has nothing to do with any of the other James Bond movies, literally. So it feels kind of apropos that this is the movie that is competing with it in theaters, because that's the only way this movie could beat a James Bond movie if it was that specific James Bond movie. And it
went out for a month.
Right. Well, I was being reminded, you mentioned Lord of War, and of course that's a way better movie about arms dealers. I was thinking of things like Stripes with that RV, and that came out a couple years prior to this. Also, the same summer, 1983, was the summer of Blue Thunder. And while they were talking about the drone technology that they have with the Peacekeeper, I was thinking of that advanced helicopter that they had in Blue Thunder, which was, again, such a better movie than this.
Yeah.
Drones?
I know.
Crazy.
I was actually kind of surprised. I'm like, wait a minute, what year was this?
Yeah, 1983.
Yeah.
Not thinking about drone technology in 1983, really, or at all. I mean, it was a little shocking to hear something so contemporary being mentioned in this movie.
I want to throw up a little defense for Billy Friedkin.
Oh, here we go.
This comes after.
You better give your best defense.
Yeah. You got one shot here, man. Don't miss. We don't. Who knows?
This comes after Cruising, which I don't think did very well at the box office.
No, there were so many protests about that,
and I don't think I mean, I don't want to put words in his mouth or anything, but I think that took a lot out of him, and I believe this was just a job for hire, pay the bills. Because what's his next film? His third masterpiece, if you ask me.
So in
that's my only defense.
In Pride Month, it is the gays' fault. I'm just kidding. I know you weren't saying that, but you're totally right. For me, Friedkin is a director that's hot or cold, and he's a great director. But even great directors make bad movies.
He's got 3 masterpieces, a couple of really solid films, and some mediocre films, some of which I enjoy. And then this, I think, I haven't seen his full body of work, but I've got to say this is probably at the bottom.
I think this is considered to be his worst film, period.
I am curious when you say his masterpieces, because for me, it's The Exorcist, Sorcerer, and To Live and Die in L.A.
Mm-hmm.
Are you... Okay, because I know some people love The French Connection a lot.
That's one of the ones like Cruising to me, which are, they're good. I'm not going to argue that they're not good movies. Cruising is an oddity, but it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoy it. This probably isn't the correct word. French Connection, as far as heist movies go, it's not one of my favorites. I'd rather watch something like The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 over and over again, which I've done.
Oh yeah.
Or The Hot Rock, or some other ones, 70s heist movies, if you can call that a heist movie, French Connection. But I don't know. Yeah, it's never really hit and I think it's partly due to Gene Hackman in that film, which I know was kind of not cool to say since he won the Oscar for it. But
Isn't he the reason you watch that movie?
Well, Popeye Doyle is a weird character, though. I had Sizzle, you ever pick your feet in Poughkeepsie line, like all that. Yeah, he's an interesting character.
I've never seen it. That's one of the Friedkin movies I've never seen.
I've never seen the sequel, which I don't think Friedkin had anything to do with.
Yeah, years ago.
Random piece of trivia in case anybody ever asks you. Yes, in fact, the fried chicken joint Popeyes is named for Gene Hackman's character.
Yes,
in The French Connection, which is actually
for Popeye the Sailor.
Yeah, actually fucking insane. I think Friedkin for me is kind of like Ridley Scott. Like your mileage with him is going to vary, and his involvement in the project does not necessarily mean it is going to be like somehow better for his involvement. Like sometimes, like we've already alluded to, and I don't think Friedkin's phoning it in. I mean, again, like, what does that even mean? What does that look like? I think it speaks volumes that he did not speak volumes about this movie, given the voluminous way he would talk about everything else he worked on and the way that he would defend the things that he worked on. And I mean, again, as someone who, again, like we've already talked about, made a movie that is in the National Registry, like it's in the Library of Congress, The Exorcist is, for good reason. Normally better judgment is given with something like this. Like you've already alluded to, Mike, I think it was so important that we got to see the script for this movie, because normally when I sit down to a movie this unfunny, I wonder like, well, it just must have been funnier on the page. Like it must have worked better on the page. No. And again, we've kind of danced around the issue. And I think that one of the biggest issues with this movie is the reason we're talking about it, which is Chevy Chase, folks. What? Why are you so uninterested in what is going on, Chevy Chase? Like, just don't understand. You can't be bothered to care.
He could have really made this a good role. Mm-hmm. This whole idea, Eddie Muntz. So you got just even the name, Eddie Muntz. It's like he talks at one point about how he doesn't sell used cars, and which is funny because his brother sells used cars. He ends up selling used cars, but he's just like, no, I'm not a used car salesman type person. But he should be. He should be that, wheeling, dealing, let's get you into this mine and these grenades. And, he should be like fucking Stephen Prince from Taxi Driver. You can go and hammer nails with it all day long and take it out and shoot it, and it'll, be straight into here. When he's given those mines to the I don't know, Sandinistas.
I was up to say, are you going to say Sandinistas?
Basically, I mean, like, he should have been like, go home, take these, play with your kids or something like that. He should have been like a real fucking cynical asshole who's selling these guns and weapons and just like fetishizes this stuff. He should have been Nicolas Cage, but he's not. And is just missing the mark completely. That voiceover should be more hard-boiled or ironic. There should be something to that. I mean, you even get to the guy who's like the Generalissimo character. And speaking of Richard Libertini, it should be the guy it should be Richard Libertini from The In-Laws. Like, it should be that Banana Republic type of guy here. And it just makes no sense. And they talk about like Viva la Libertad, and it's like he says to the guys, he's selling to both sides. But I don't even know if the movie really gets that across, that he sells to both sides, and that he should basically be like Yojimbo, who's like arming both sides of these and just taking money from everybody. But like he gets one bucket of money and then it just goes up in flames. And it's like, no, it should be. Maybe that's the irony of it, is that he keeps getting paid, but every single time he turns around, the money gets stolen or lost or blown up or something, but just make it interesting. And I know that's a lot for me to ask a movie, but it's like, please give me something to care about. And then for you, the problem might be Chevy Chase, but for me, the problem is Gregory Hines. And what the fuck is this character doing in this movie? My God. And I want to say there was one more scene of him in the script where like he steals a plane because he's very into flying. He loves the freedom of flying, but steals a plane at the beginning, not at the end. Mm. And because when we're introduced to him, again, super late in the proceedings, it's just like, oh, I'm thinking about giving my life over to Jesus. Like right away, he hits you with that stuff. And you're like, okay, what's the problem with this guy? And then he is obviously, I'm not bashing religion, though I love to do that. He's obviously mentally unstable just with that flamethrower scene. What the fuck is going on with that? And then it feels like they didn't have him come back to do ADR. It literally feels like they took bits of that scene and a few other lines to put for ADR when he's flying the plane at the end of the movie. This just felt like a fucking mess.
Yeah. Like you're like, let's talk about Gregory Hines. Like, man, do we have to? Because like
I didn't get it.
Yeah,
I didn't get it.
Yeah, and I'm with you. It's like it's a waste of his time, and it's in conjunction, it's a waste of our time. Because like, why is this like? I'm not saying Chevy Chase's character is interesting, but somehow Gregory Hines' character is so uninteresting. Put Chevy Chase on screen, please, because I don't want to see any more of whatever it is he's selling.
Make it some sort of thing between him and Sigourney Weaver, because there's nothing between those two characters. Sorry, Mark, I cut you off.
That's okay. I was just going to say I expected Hines to be a foil now for the deals, like to undermine Chase because he's had this change of heart and he's going to these Baptist meetings in a house and getting baptized in a pool, and he's going to sabotage the plans, which I guess is sort of what he does at the end in the airplane. But their partners, this should be a problem for their partnership, other than Chevy going, "What are you doing?" Whatever his name is in the film, Ray. "What are you doing, Ray? What are you doing, Ray?" That's all. That's the only tension between the two. He doesn't understand what he's doing. And instead of Gregory Hines being a foil, other than the only foil that Chevy Chase has is himself in the film. And I guess Sigourney Weaver in a way, but I don't know what her loyalty is either.
Oh, yeah. What a waste of a character. Again, you're like, is she trying to manipulate Chevy Chase at first? Yes, she is.
Yes.
And then she seems to get with the program way too easily. And like she settles into this role of, I'm going to wine and dine and 69 the Generalissimo so that we can seal this deal. And
it was offensive. I gotta tell you, that scene was offensive.
It was very offensive. I mean, just like he expects her to sleep with this guy, and she just is like, okay. I'm like, wait, like there's a little hesitation, there's a little thing in there about like, oh, I feel bad for sending you to do that, but it is so inconsequential to this movie. That should have been like an emotional core to this, that he is so desperate to make this deal. He does everything. He betrays Ray. He sells out Mrs. DeVoto, all this stuff. She is the least grieving widow that I've ever met in my entire life. I have no idea why she married Wallace Shawn's character, what she's doing with this stuff. She's a conniving bitch through half of the movie and then goes with the program for the rest of it. And there is no chemistry between her and Chevy Chase whatsoever in this whole thing. I mean, she makes Dana Barrett's character in Ghostbusters, look like she's so compassionate and like really connects with Bill Murray, which she kind of doesn't. Like, I'm always so surprised in the second movie when they have a kid together, because I like kept thinking she's going to drop him like it's hot, because there's nothing between them.
It's not their kid.
Oh,
it's her kid from another marriage that then Bill Murray chooses to raise, which is even more unbelievable because Bill Murray and kids, really?
Yeah.
Those two things go together like oil and I don't know, anything else, water, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
I kept expecting that scene with the Generalissimo because we've got the voiceover dialogue with all the images playing on the TV screen. And I thought we were going to have a shot of them where that's not what they're doing.
Right.
The dialogue, but they can't do that joke, I guess. I kept waiting for absurdity and absurd jokes, and they just never happened in this. And to me, that would have paid off, because for one thing, she's not actually sleeping with the guy. For, Chevy Chase, who's a heel in this movie. And it could have ended with a laugh. Instead, it was just like, I'm disgusted by this. Why is she doing this? Because it's written that way. That's the only reason why this woman would do this.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, there's the other scenes of potential comedy, like the Peacemaker drone itself not working. And you get to see the crew and the guys that are working on this with an uncredited Tracy Walter. I don't know why he.
To see Tracy Walters in this, I thought every time I see him, I think of you, Begley. I think of you in that Silence of the Lambs episode that we did.
Clip in. I know you don't put clips in the shows, Chris, but you got to put that clip.
I guess I should just for that, because every time
A bug gets in there.
Well, when we first started talking, though, I was like, where's his accent? He's near on the accent.
Well, and then Charles Levin, who we just saw in that Gin No Chaser episode of, at least is a little more calm in this one. But
when I saw him, I was like, oh God, something else that wasn't great. I love being reminded of bad things inside of other terrible things.
But like that whole scene of them trying to make this drone work, but I guess they're more concerned about the air conditioning. I'm like, I know, tie in the air conditioning, like there needs to be something there. And then even when they have the one busty lady crash champagne, dedicate the Peacemaker, I was like, well, there's your excuse for why it doesn't work. Like this thing should be so cobbled together with scotch tape and hope and paper clips that anything is going to make it go off. I mean, basically it should be like an Ed 209, and it kind of is an Ed 209 at times, and then other times it's like, no, it works absolutely fine. But like what? Make this thing, make Vince Edwards as Stryker so obsessive about this, and then it has to work. This movie also reminded me a lot of Real Genius, and this whole thing of like this laser has to work, and we're using this laser, and it's actually for a military thing and not for a peace thing. But it's just like, maybe there's something like that in there. Maybe there's like some sort of wire or process that always goes wrong. And whenever they hit a certain thing, that process is going to go wrong. But no, there's nothing. Instead, they're worried about the air conditioning. The second time, it just kind of goes off the way it's supposed to, but then destroys this field of other planes. Wow. Again, I'm flummoxed by just how poorly put together this is.
So we know IMDb is the source of trivia. So I went on there to look, and God's honest truth. Did you guys know that this was, in fact, a comedy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Your IMDb is like, this is a comedic film. I was like, oh, is that what this is supposed to be?
That's what they're trying to do with this. I think the scene of Ray Manzarek selling guns, and then Robert David Hall, who's just like super twisted and talking about shooting innocent people.
I wanted to see that movie of his character. And I know, CSI fans will know. I saw him on the cast list before we started watching. I'm like, oh, the coroner from CSI is on here. And I was just waiting for him to show up. And that character, to me, the guy that gets, and obviously the actor didn't really lose his legs in Vietnam, but that character to me would be an interesting movie where this guy gets his legs blown off in Vietnam and then turns into this arms dealer selling these weapons of mass destruction, and he's in there for like what, a minute, 2 minutes,
if that.
He was the most fascinating character to me.
Oh yeah,
even though that scene was odd.
It was incredibly odd. And I mentioned Ed 209, and that level of irony, or the irony of another Verhoeven film with Robert David Hall, where he turns around and goes, mobile infantry is what made me the man I am today, and he's got no legs. And I'm just like, that is chef's kiss to you, Paul Verhoeven. Where is that irony here, man? I mean, the whole thing where why am I blanking on Stryker's name? Vincent Edwards is like, oh well, these drones are great. They never get tired. They don't shoot their own officers. They don't bleed. I'm like, okay, yeah, it kind of reminds me of the EES Corporation talking about making the perfect workers. They don't have a mouth. They have, 6 arms so they can do all these tasks. I'm like, again, like the irony, the Dr. Strangelove-ness of it, the catch-22-ness of it. It's like there are hints in there, but it never really realizes what this is.
Why would we try? We have Chevy Chase in our movie. We don't have to try.
Because he has to be flippant. He can't be, like Mike was saying, he can't be the car salesman, which I believe Ed Madman Muntz in real life was a car salesman.
He was, yeah.
I guess that's the gag there.
I remember that mostly from Pork Lips Now because it was Muntz instead of Kurtz. Yeah, he got out of the car business. Then he got out of the car. Never get out of the car.
But he doesn't play. I guess he can't play the goofball. Does he ever play the goofball?
Yeah, it's Clark Griswold. That's Clark Griswold.
Yeah.
Like, that's like as much of a goofball as Chevy Chase is willing to allow himself to be.
Yeah. But he's still kind of flippant there too.
Yeah, well, he has to be flippant. Like that's the thing. You alluded to it. Look at what is on either side of this movie in his filmography. The last movie we watched, which is ostensibly one of his most famous movies, followed by, again, I think his second most famous role.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I mean, look, I didn't realize that as a precocious youngster, me liking Fletch would be me liking the best movie Chevy Chase has ever made, but I guess that ended up being the fucking case. Because I haven't seen anything yet that we've watched that can hold a candle to Vacation, let alone the next movie we're going to watch, because the fact that this is in between them, this is the proverbial shit sandwich, like compliment sandwich. Good, bad beyond belief, and then good on the other side. Like this, Chevy Chase doesn't make this movie better. He actively makes it worse. And again, it goes back to this idea, at least for me, of like, why are you here not participating? Like, I get that you're a cool guy and being apathetic is cool, but how can you be so apathetic you don't even show up to be in the movie? Like, I mean, I'm impressed that they still paid you, but Jesus Christ.
I was curious, and I didn't say it in the trivia, and I didn't really look it up, but I was curious to see if he had a real foot injury that required the cast, because
that gag wasn't so funny to do it twice in the movie. Yuck.
It is in the script having the cast, so I don't think it was like Richard Dreyfuss in The Big Fix or something where they had to work that into it.
Yeah, it just seemed weird.
It was very weird to do that, and then I think it's supposed to be very funny, and the way that Friedkin shoots it is not funny. Because the whole thing of them putting a cork in the hole that she shot in the cast the second time, it's like, I think it's a line that he says, "Is that a cork?" I'm like, that should have been the funny part. That should have been a close up, boom, put that cork in there, funny sound effect of the cork going in, nothing. Absolutely nothing. And instead, it's almost upsetting with the way that the blood's shooting out of there. It should have been like the blood shooting out of the guy's nose in Modern Problems,
Right.
Which I think might be a better Chevy Chase.
Oh my God.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
It's
a mile.
It's not only
And
that.
it's not great.
It's actually a funnier movie too, which is like an even more of an affront to good senses. Like this, I genuinely think that, and we've been getting there this year in some of the stuff that we watched. This is similarly to Casino Royale, which we watched for Rankin on Bond. This is without a doubt one of the worst things I've ever watched to talk about with anybody else that is a mainstream Hollywood film. That's the other qualifier that needs to be given. This is directed by William Friedkin with Chevy Chase and Sigourney Weaver and Gregory Hines. Not 90s Chevy Chase, like Chevy Chase again at ostensibly what would be the height of his power as an actor. He's about to be in his biggest role, effectively, his sole vehicle movie that then they would spin off a movie that's not good. But even Fletch Lives makes this, like, Fletch Lives looks like the fucking Mona Lisa compared to this, like, what's effectively, two gorillas in a fucking pen throwing shit at a canvas and claiming it's art. Like, I know why I've never seen this movie now. And I know, like, it's self-explanatory why this movie is not talked about. But Friedkin, of all people, should have written at least something about it in his book. That's like, you know how much of a glaring omission it is that you don't write anything about it, pal? Like, come on now. You had something to say about everything else but this? What, did you just fall asleep for 8 months and then wake up? What are you, a bear? Did you hibernate, for fuck's sake?
What was the other one? The Guardian he doesn't talk about either?
That's kind of a fun, quirky.
Yeah, I don't find a problem with that. Yeah.
Like Bug. I mean, those are kind of two of the oddball ones that I was mentioning earlier. Bug and The Guardian are weird.
I love Killer Joe.
Comedy?
Yeah.
Killer Joe's kind of a comedy. Like, Killer Joe is kind of, it's as comedic as anything Friedkin really makes, which is to say, like, bucked up.
Maybe he just can't do comedy. I don't know. You mentioned the sound effect for the cork, and I was kind of surprised to hear the boing sound effect.
Those both things were out of control. Yeah, I mean when the sound effects around the Peacemaker, I mean, like again, it reminded me so much of Ed 209, like when Ed finally powers down and you get the noise going. And it's like, that is funny. And yeah, they're adding the boing in here and you're like, I'm not getting that this thing is that out of control. Like,
this isn't Looney Tunes. You haven't played any. You haven't
Nothing.
You haven't earned the Looney Tune noises here with this because you're not going absurd enough.
Well, they have. I mean, this is a film made by Warner Brothers, so they've got access. So yeah,
it's true.
Yeah, I mean, they're like, hey, what would be funnier other than some like boing boing noises? Nothing. I mean, Chevy Chase could be funnier if he tried, but fuck trying. Am I right? There's something, and we've brought this up like over and over again with Chevy Chase, and it's interesting to me how apathetic he comes across in these movies. And like I know that it's his act. Like, look, in Fletch, there is a kind of a note of that, but man, people really misread what made Chevy Chase appealing. Is what this feels like. Like watching this movie and knowing that again, like Chevy Chase, when you watch a movie, it's hard to sit. If you don't watch movies a lot and realize that like the movie didn't just happen in one day. This movie happened over days, months, a year even, like years. It takes years from something to go from script to screen, sometimes decades even. Development hell is a thing. And the thing that is shocking to me is that people sat every day and worked on this movie for months. And by the end of it, anybody was willing to show up to the premiere. Because this movie is just, it's like, again, like criminally unfunny to the point where if I was Chevy Chase and Gregory Hines and Sigourney Weaver, if this movie got a premiere and it premiered and they were there, I would be squirming in my seat the whole movie. I would want to be anywhere but in the room, surrounded by people who are also squirming in their seat because they're being forced to watch my movie. That is, they're going to have to be like, oh, that was great. Like, can we talk about anything else now? Can we just, what are you working on now? Like, got anything else going on? Like, anything but this. Because it's rare that I find a movie that is this bad. But here we are.
This was a Warner Brothers film, right?
Yeah, Warner Brothers Archive was selling it for.
Are you suggesting that it should have been Zaslaved?
Boy, in this day and age, it would have. Yeah, Batgirl, being Batgirl may have been a fucking a nice thing to do to a movie like this.
And yes, people, I know that he was not the head of Warner Brothers back in 1983, so you can save your anger.
Maybe he should have been, just so that things like this didn't get made.
This I wouldn't have been mad about this being ditched for tax write-off purposes, to be honest with you.
I mean, kind of feels like it was, given how little money the movie. Like, and again, what's weird to me.
That's why I was surprised it was number one. Yeah, any point in its release.
It made a third of the money it was ever going to make that first weekend. I probably speak for the three of us in that, like, sitting down to do this show, we were like, well, maybe we're going to find something that the world had slept on. Just, again, like, not to say that we're like geniuses or anything. You can call us that. We don't want to self-declare it. But like, there's always the opportunity for something like this to be like, oh, just, everybody's kind of slept on it, but that's okay. But,
well, as a stable genius, I want to talk about the
very stable genius,
the arms dealer convention. I mean, again, that should have been hilarious. Like, there should have been so many weird weapons or like just overkill type of thing.
It'd have been the Abrams Zucker thing. It sure as hell would have been.
Well, like even
exploding in an elephant or something. Do something with the weapons,
right? Do you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of the convention that they have in The Conversation, the Francis Ford Coppola film, where it's all of these different gadgets that they're doing, and like, you've got Alan Garfield there, and he's trying to sell you with something. But it doesn't make any sense that you have Chevy Chase trying to sell the electrocuting urinal to these guys when he's supposed to be there. And in the next shot, he's there kind of whining and dining the Generalissimo guy. I'm like, well, why didn't you get somebody who was actually fucking funny to do this urinal gag? But yeah, give me like 5 of those gags. Give me 5 different things that are ridiculous, crazy. Yeah, like you're saying, like an elephant. Maybe it's it looks like an elephant, but it's actually this thing, like, or something. Give me something to handle with this, something to laugh at.
I don't think that William Friedkin was the right choice for this movie.
But again, it goes back to that fucking script.
It goes back to this,
and I don't see where Robert Towne had anything to do with this either. He got an uncredited rewrite in here. I'm like, no, what I read is basically what we ended up with.
Yeah, that's like I mentioned to you pre-recording. I was expecting to hear sort of like with the
Under the Rainbow,
where things were excised that made it make sense, that made it funnier, that maybe were a little raunchy. That
I mean, all those scenes that just ended maybe had something else to them,
or the scenes weren't connecting either. And so like, there's got to be some connective tissue here that's missing. Maybe this reads in that absurd tone that I felt was missing. Maybe it reads that way, and it's the actors, it's the director that they're just not going there. But it sounds like no, none of that was true. So I'm glad I didn't read this.
No.
Well, and like we've alluded to, like the fact that we and by we, Mike, you were able to find the script. Like, yeah, we know where not the blame, as it were, but we know where the idea fomented from and where it starts. And where it starts is this. Look, Paul Brickman wrote Risky Business. Paul Brickman probably known for Risky Business. Probably, because everything else that he wrote or directed and wrote, not nearly as well received or even known at all. Unless someone here is a fan of The Bad News of Breaking and Training.
Well, I love Citizens Band. I absolutely love that film. We've talked about that.
Did he write Citizens Band?
Yeah, he wrote.
Oh, I guess, yeah, Handle with Care. Right. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
I have a pet spot for Bad News Bears and Breaking Training.
Same here.
That's a childhood thing. But
like none of those are Risky Business, though, is what I mean. Like Risky Business is like, that's the thing. Like written and directed by, you would assume that guy who wrote and directed Risky Business would have been able to make something.
He peaked. He peaked there because it's Citizens Band, which we all enjoyed, Bad News Bears and Breaking Training, which Mike and I like, and then Risky Business, which you could call, a classic 80s teen sex romp, and then nothing else after that.
Yeah.
Worth note.
It is very funny to me to look at the composer of this, Arthur B. Rubinstein, and that he wrote 5 scores in 1983, or was credited for 5 scores in 83, and including one that I've already mentioned, Blue Thunder, and another one that this somewhat reminded me of, which was War Games. War Games, where it's incredibly deadly serious, though there are some funny bits to it. John Badham managed to balance those things out very well. Badham even did Blue Thunder. It's like, give this movie to fucking John Badham and see what he can do with it. And I would hope that somebody would rewrite this before it finally came out, because I remember even reading the script and I was confused about that whole Khashoggi thing, the Richard Libertini section. I was looking at page numbers thinking that I was missing pages because it was so abruptly in and out of the script. And there's also a moment where I was like, was that the general's name? Did I screw up? No, they just drop a character in and then take him out.
And with something like this, I think, like you mentioning John Badham, like the thing that bothers me maybe the most about this movie, and I think just in general now, having done this so long, like yourself, when a director refuses to talk about a movie, like, you want to tell us why it is like this? Because you're getting an opportunity in your words to tell us, bro. Like, this is your shot to crow and say and blame. I mean, not saying blaming anybody else is okay, but like, this is your chance to do it. If you're going to write a book yourself and someone's asking you to write a book about your career, you have the opportunity. I mean, even David Lynch has talked about Dune finally in the last like 6 months. Even he's kind of finally decided to, though Dune's making money now, I guess I can talk about it. I mean, don't want to be that guy, but it also kind of feels a little bit like that. But I think to your point, like Friedkin brings nothing to this project, and I don't understand his involvement just based on the subject material. Because, yeah, like someone else would have been better suited to direct something like this just based on the subject material. This is so kind of, I know Friedkin likes to work on kind of just whatever he wants to work on, but like, I really wish we could know what drew him to this project. And again, if he's unwilling to talk about it, we will never know, because I looked, I'm sure we all looked, like there is very little about this movie on the internet in way of like information about it, other than other kind of review sites having kind of collated some of the stuff that's out there. But because Friedkin refused to talk about it, we don't get to hear from the horse's mouth why it is this way. And this is one of those movies that I'm like oddly perplexed by and kind of wish there was more about it. Cause yeah, like you said, kind of in the opening, Mike, it's like that scene of Silent Bob in The Simpsons, just walking onto a rake, or not Silent Bob, Sideshow Bob, stepping on a rake over and over again. Like, how did you make every wrong move every time you had an opportunity to make a move? You made the wrong one.
Yeah. And he had no problem bad mouthing other people.
Right. I mean, that's what I mean. Like the thing with Nicholas Winding Refn, like, are you insane? It's like, Friedkin, are you fucking with us? Because like you made a movie that I is indefensible as a film, frankly. Like it's an indefensible piece of filmmaking that when I was watching it last night after having spent the day watching other movies, I was like, this is the worst thing I've watched today, and probably in a good while, frankly, at this point.
Are we going to get any lower in this? I don't know.
I don't think so.
Not. I really hope not.
God, even Nothing But Trouble is at least bizarre. Like at least it's just it's a fucking weird movie, but in it being a weird movie, okay, like that's the other thing. Like this doesn't even take any chances or do anything that's, I don't know. It's not a failure in a way that's at least interesting. It's just kind of like it just kind of farts along and then just like shits itself before anything. It shits itself long before anything interesting can even happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you get those weird scenes like Gregory Hines reading all the specs for the weapons and things. Then he's able to just jump in there with all the facts. I'm like, okay, well, that's cool, but maybe that's not his character, because his character, to our point from earlier, has become born again and he's trying to get himself out of the arms selling business. Feels like he could easily do that. It feels like it should be another character.
It's like the mob, Mike, don't you know? Once you're in, you can't leave.
Yeah, I guess. So it should have been another character who is this kind of, interesting autistic type Rain Man type character that they can give all this material to, and he can spit out all these facts for it. Having that be the Ray character doesn't really make a lot of sense. And especially because that's like a superpower he suddenly has in this movie that we've never seen and never experienced before.
Yeah. It could have been Ray Manzarek, maybe. Pop back in and be the idiot savant.
That works for me. He did a decent job for the one scene that he was in, and I thought that was nice irony of him selling all these weapons.
I kind of forgot that he dabbled in movies. I'm trying to think of another example, and I can't. I should have looked it up beforehand, but I know he appeared in a handful of films over the years.
Man, with 10% on Rotten Tomatoes is rough. I mean,
it makes sense though after you watch the
yeah.
So as much as I dismiss Rotten Tomatoes as a thing, kind of nailed it on this one.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's kind of a good thing this movie's hard to find. Like I'm glad that this movie is not necessarily easy to find, because the less people who stumble upon this film, the better. Like
I definitely remember it at the video store. I remember that box cover very, very well.
That should have been the Chasing Chevy Chase podcast album artwork, is the three of us doing that. And then one of us, but it's all three of us doing the thumbs fucking I honestly can't even believe Warner Archive was selling this at one point. Like I want to know Warner Archive. Tell me how many people bought this. Please tell me, like 10 people. It was reissued in 2014.
I'm surprised I didn't watch it as a kid, to be honest with you.
I'm surprised it wasn't mentioned by you guys like that. Like it was on TV all the time. Like
never saw it on cable and never bothered to rent it, even though I felt like I was a Chevy Chase fan back then.
Maybe you knew subconsciously.
Maybe.
It feels like I might have seen this on cable, but I definitely, when I was watching it for the first, when I watched it yesterday, it felt like the first time I was watching it. And
I know it's the first time for me. I didn't recognize anything. Wow.
Any movie that bothers Ray Manzarek enough to have him show up in it is fine by me.
God.
Yeah, I honestly thought that Oh Heavenly Dog was going to be kind of the low point, but even, God, Oh Heavenly Dog.
Modern Problems?
Yeah, well, but that's the thing. Like, Modern Problems wasn't really that bad in retrospect, comparatively to this. At least Modern Problems had a plot that I could follow. At least Modern Problems didn't like have 3 acts that made no sense together as if they made any sense alone separately.
Yeah.
At least, you know what? At least Modern Problems had Dabney Coleman in it.
A weird Dabney Coleman.
Which,
but Dabney Coleman nonetheless.
now, rest in peace, Dabney Coleman, on top of everything else. Since we've started the show, Dabney Coleman has passed away. So, Jesus. Yeah. I did wonder, though, because this was the other thing that was rolling through my head. If Eddie Murphy had been in this movie, it wouldn't have even salvaged it. If they had somehow got Eddie Murphy into Gregory Hines' role, would it have been any better? Probably would have been worse, because it would have been like, look, it's Eddie Murphy and Chevy Chase in this movie together, and it's terrible.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's already a waste of Gregory. It's a waste of everybody's time. Sigourney Weaver deserves better.
Yeah.
Gregory Hines deserves better. Tracy Walter deserves better. I mean, everybody deserves better in this movie, with the exception maybe of Chevy Chase. Running Scared, I want to say, was like 85 or 86.
86, man.
Yeah.
You want to see Gregory Hines in a good comedy.
A movie. Yes.
Or Cotton Club, not for a comedy, but for a good Gregory Hines performance. God, what else?
Not Dirty Work. White Knights.
Yeah, man, talk about a talented guy. But this is just like, phew.
Yeah, I haven't seen Gregory Hines in enough stuff.
Hell, even Eve of Destruction, he was better in.
God, I haven't seen that in decades.
I haven't seen him in enough stuff to have an opinion about him, but he's like, this would not be the movie to base any opinion of anybody for their acting abilities. Like,
No.
Jesus Christ.
Check out Running Scared, Chris. It's fun.
It's a great one. And Joey Haley's in there.
JP Ants.
Joey Pants.
Yep. He's Jerry Smith's one of his early roles. Oh, yeah. John Grease is amazing in that.
Dan Hedaya, Jimmy Smits, Larry Hankin, Don Calfa.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I forgot Don Calfa's in there. Oh, yeah.
Larry Hankin and Don Calfa are people that I confuse in my brain. So
that's right. Because it's Calfa that serves Billy Crystal the papers in the, Gregory Hines the papers in the washroom.
Yeah. Maybe Tracy Walters made it out light from Deal of the Century, just uncredited.
I don't need my name on there.
That's okay. I mean, and it's not a bit. I mean, it's a small role, but he's in 2 or 3 scenes.
He's got lines.
Yeah, and he's got lines. So I found that uncredited thing to be odd.
You mean that movie I did with the director who did that movie, Bug?
Sometimes there's like leaves and things in there.
Fucking Friedkin, man. Yeah, you know what?
This was the same year as Repo Man, I believe. So at least
I think
Repo had that.
Yeah. Yeah, and at least Chevy had Vacation same year.
And Fletch the year after.
Oh,
I thought
that's 84. Sorry.
I think Fletch was 2 years later. I want to say
Fletch
85.
Was Fletch 85? Yeah.
I
Well,
want to say, yeah.
take a
He had to regroup after this.
take a fucking break after this movie for a while.
The only thing he's credited for in 84 is the Ghostbusters video.
Oh.
I'm sorry, Mark. I talked over you.
No, that's okay. I just said we should have watched Repo Man instead of this.
Yeah.
I think we should have watched anything other than this. Like, yeah.
It happens with these kind of podcasts, these theme podcasts.
Yeah, we have to watch everything, which
I kind of hate talking about movies I don't like. Just feel like you're ragging on it the whole time, you know. That can't be fun.
But here's the other thing. In reality, though, A, we didn't sit the entire time and make fun of it, which is literally what anybody else would have done. And B, more than anything else, I'm just shocked that this movie exists like this. Yeah. More than anything else, because again, if there's if this is like David Fincher refuses to talk about it, but everybody else does, that's one thing. But nobody has said anything about this, so it's just like, it's a bad movie.
That doesn't surprise me.
It doesn't surprise me, but I wish somebody would say something other than nothing.
It
was bad.
Disaster.
An oral history of Deal of the Century.
You're not going to see that.
Brought to you by Vanity Fair.
Yeah, boy.
That's your first book, Chris. Get a book.
God, can you imagine?
Start tracking these people down.
You know, our friend
They'll all refuse to talk to you.
Our friend Ryan Verrill of Someone's Favorite Productions contends that every movie is someone's favorite movie.
Yeah.
Right, but could this really be someone's favorite movie?
I'm sure.
I want to meet that. I want to meet that person though, and ask them like, just tell me what's great.
Look on IMDb. Somebody, there was like a 10 out of 10 user review of this.
Wow.
Is that real? Is that for real? Nails the world. Please tell me. Oh, Office. Yeah, here you go. Office Space for the defense industry. This is a must-see. 10 out of 10. This is a must-see for any Chevy Chase fan or anyone who has ever worked at a large defense subcontractor. Office
Lockheed. All those Lockheed employees love it.
I've worked at big companies, both defense and commercial, and this movie portrays them quite accurately.
That may be true.
Yeah.
That may be true.
Because that is the potential for the comedy. I mean, the way that we start off this movie with the commercial, if not for you, for them, you know, that whole thing. I mean, and it's very similar to how Real Genius starts off with that whole idea of the guys that are out and fighting in these planes and things. And it's just like, defense contracting can be a funny thing. We've seen other movies that handle this and handle it so much better. And the irony should have been off the charts with this thing. These guys are out there selling weapons of destruction to people that shouldn't have these weapons. I mean, they even make a comment at one part that like the Generalissimo can't even spell his own name, but yet we're selling all of these dangerous weapons to him. Yeah, that's where the comedy can come from, guys. That's also where the pathos can come from, but there's neither comedy nor pathos in this entire film.
This movie is for people who want to learn about the ugly convergence of business and war, peppered with a handful of great jokes about the subject. 10 out of 10. This movie is, and they're not being hyperbolic at all, brilliant. This movie is brilliant.
This movie also makes a very strong moral point about the military-industrial complex that should be taught, whether with this movie or not, to all people before they are allowed to vote.
This is actually the best part here, to bring this all full circle. So this is written in September 15th of 2005. Why is that important? The last line of this review gives you an idea why. The movie Lord of War with Nicolas Cage is about to be released. And from the trailer, it looks like the writer saw a deal of the century and decided to update it for 2005. Yeah.
Hey, prove that's not true, Craig.
So there are multiple 10 out of 10s because you just combined two of them. There are all. There's another that has spoilers.
Those people's favorite movie.
This movie's completely understood according to Flip Hop from September 5th, 2005.
According to J.R. Williams 51, doll, in all caps, Chevy Chase, Sigourney Weaver, and Gregory Hines stir up a real deal. The absolute beautiful Catherine DeVoto, played by Sigourney Weaver, is a total dream girl, gun-carrying, and this is my favorite, submissive female.
Oh, she's a dread wife. Love the dread wife.
Yeah. Can trad wives carry guns, though?
Oh boy, they should.
Ugh.
They should know how to strip and whatever they need to do.
Yeah, Yale's cleaning him, scene. Yeah.
Yes. This left-wing comedy is so very boring that it doesn't even have the strength to properly annoy me. Its supports for communist rebels and its disdain for Reagan and everything that he stood for is just so idiotic and trite. Weaver is her usual uncharismatic self, and Chase has never been this unfunny, but there's hardly anybody who would have been funny in this script. It amazes me that it actually went through the last draft of the script and actually thought, yeah, this will be good. It's so funny that they went for the left.
Did you write that, Mike?
No, that was Fedor 8 from 8 Jan 2007.
This is honestly this
typing.
This is the funniest shit to me because again, speaking of where this is in Chevy Chase's career, if you are at all a Chevy Chase fan and enjoy his older work. Now, in parentheses, they put Caddyshack, Fletch, and etc. His older work, that was the 80s. He's still working, technically, then this is definitely worth renting. An older work is Caddyshack and Fletch. Caddyshack is ostensibly one of Chevy Chase's like earlier things. No,
Well,
like
there's only 3 years separating this from that, so it's not old. It's contemporary work.
no, his older work.
Previous.
Caddyshack is his older. He never made anything after Fletch, Bagley. That's his older works. If only that were the case. If only the next thing we were talking about is the last thing we were talking about.
Oh, boy.
God. Well, anyone who likes Family Guy or Futurama will have a good chance of appreciating this movie. 18 of 27 people found this review helpful. So, you know, if at least 19 people who listen to this find this helpful, will have been at least one more helpful than the person who gave this movie a 10 out of 10. In 2005, mind you, when other movies had come out, plenty of them, Frank.
What other movies? What other movies existed in 2005?
Yeah, I think we are just about to crack 19 as far as our listener base. So maybe if we get 20 people that find this podcast interesting.
Those thumbs up, smash that like button.
Yeah.
Like and subscribe. Yeah.
They'll make our show the deal of a century of podcasts now. Though we'd have to stoop pretty low at this point to even subterrate. Ugh. Chevy Chase, man. Chevy Chase is not trying.
So let me propose this. I was thinking about this last night, and I believe there's some crossover. The next series should be Dan Aykroyd films.
Oh, God.
Only if we get to cover that video of Dan Aykroyd talking for 2 hours in a hotel room about aliens and chain smoking like 40.
Well, I haven't seen that one.
Ladies and
Holy
gentlemen,
shit.
my name is Dan Aykroyd, and I believe in aliens. Boy, we're off to a good start here, Dan.
Wow.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, Dan Aykroyd always strikes me as like a genuine human being, and maybe Chevy Chase is now, but like, I don't think Dan Aykroyd would do something he doesn't. Not that he doesn't believe in. 2016 Ghostbusters. Is
I get what you're saying.
but like Dan Aykroyd's always. I at least know that Dan Aykroyd is kind of always at least showing up as Dan Aykroyd. Chevy Chase, it's like, why are you here? The money they're paying me. Okay,
I hear you.
somebody paid him for this movie. Somebody made money. Well, somebody spent money to make this movie. And every day they looked at those dailies and they were like, we are in so much trouble.
I think what the problem was that this was written by leftists with a communist agenda who just wanted to make fun of our dear President Reagan.
Oh, I thought that this was, in fact, about Donald Trump somehow. Just in 1983. You didn't know? Somehow. Tie it back. We'll just tie it all ties back in the end. Leftist agenda. Boy, if this is the leftist agenda, they got us all wrong. The leftist deal of the century is our Bible. This is the sacred text for the leftist agenda. God.
It doesn't even hit that.
No. Who could be offended by this movie? Like,
I mean, the two times that they reference Reagan, where they actually have clips of Reagan, I mean, it just fits with everything that they're saying in the movie. It's not very ironic. Yeah.
Right. Big quality spiel, basically. That's what they're doing.
It's very toothless as a satire. And that, like, you know, maybe to bring this all full circle, like, that is the worst thing about this movie is, you know, like we mentioned, it's like Doctor Strange dumb. Like, it's just dumb. It has nothing to say. It thinks it's clever. I watched the preview for the movie before I watched it last night, and they show that scene where they all fly back after the rocket launcher. Doesn't make any sense in the trailer. Doesn't make any sense in the movie. The movie doesn't have any idea what it's trying to do. And yeah, I've referenced it so many times this year on several episodes of the show, the William Friedkin Winding Refn interview. Like, I wish I could have 5 minutes and a time machine to go back in time and be like, hey, Friedkin, what's the deal? Like, that should have been his retort. Winding Refn's retort should have been, tell me about deal of the century, Billy. Come on, pal. Like, I mean, again, like, if you're unwilling to talk about your movie, maybe, just thinking aloud here, you shouldn't have made it. Because again, movie isn't made in one day. It's made in months of time, and people edited this movie and sat in the premiere and booked catering every day, and like people were spending time making this. And whatever on the other side, we're lucky that movies are good, because this is what it looks like when all of the cylinders fire in every direction but forward. It's like everything goes awry. And this is a good example of it. This is like Casino Royale for me. If anyone ever comes up to me and is like, my favorite movie's Deal of the Century, I'm not going to run away from them. I'm going to ask them, can you please tell me why? Because tell me, please. I have to know. I'm so glad neither one of you were like, I loved this movie. Be like, I don't think we could be friends anymore.
Oh, come on.
I mean, it's not that bad, but like I think this is one of the worst things I've ever done an episode on. Again, in terms of just like a modern Hollywood thing, like made by an actual studio. This isn't released by 2000 Mules Productions or whatever insane ass shit. Bad movies now don't look like this, right? This is what a bad movie looked like in the 80s. Bad movies now are like very different. This is just kind of a very specific kind of comedy that would come out in the 80s that just failed. Most of them just didn't have Chevy Chase in them and Gregory Hines and Sigourney Weaver. So with Deal of the Century in our rearview mirror, yes, on the next episode of the Chasing Chevy Chase podcast, we will be talking about 1985's Fletch. Guess what? It's a good movie. So that's a spoiler. That's not even a spoiler. That's a fact. So until then, where can people find you and the things that you work on, Mark Begley?
You can find this show and my 2 other shows, Cambridge and with Sean and Wake Up Heavy, over on the Weirding Way Media podcast site.
What about you, Mark?
That is.
What about you, Mike White?
What about me, Mark White?
What about you, Mark? Yeah. What about you, Mark White?
You find everything that I do over at weirdingwaymedia.com as well, except for one thing which Chris and I have on our respective Patreons, which is Rankin' on Bond, where every month we talk about a different James Bond film. And ironically, it always seems to be the same day that we're talking about Chevy Chase film. So maybe one of these days, the 2 universes will collide. Next James Bond, Chevy Chase. What do you think? He's only like 80-something years old.
His chance, man.
Oh, you're saying like now he could play him? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What do you think, huh?
Good God.
You think what will happen is that Gunsight will come over as he's walking across, and then he'll do a pratfall and break his hip.
Right. Yeah. And break his hip. Is that not funny? Like, hilarity ensues. God. Yeah, as for me and my opinions on things, they can be found over at Weirding Way Media as well, where I do the Culture Cast and so many other things with Mike and Mark have both been on the Culture Cast plenty of times. So yeah, that's where you can find that show. Wherever, please like, rate, and review this show on iTunes regardless, irrespective of where you get it, because it helps us find an audience, and iTunes is where 75% of people who listen to things like this find it. So yeah, like, rate, and review on iTunes, please, wherever you get it. And please come back and join us on the next episode, where I promise we'll be talking about something that's good. Not this, though.